Welcome back to another episode of our Eagle Perspective podcast. I'm Mike Siciliano, Dean of Students of the Upper School. I'm here once again continuing our Yard of Books series with our head of schools, Rod Gilbert. Rod, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
So today is our first video podcast.
Yes.
For some reason, someone thought it would be a good idea if they could see us.
That's a problem.
At some point, we should start questioning the wisdom of these decisions.
There are we were both out of town for a while. A lot of decisions were made while we were gone.
Right. It was like, hey, we're doing a podcast. There's going to be cameras. To the extent that our audience is already too small, I'm not sure this will help.
No, and we both have faces made for radio.
Yeah. Agreed. So what book did you bring for us
today? We're looking at Roald Dahl's book, James and the Giant Peach.
Okay, so Roald Dahl, renowned child author primarily,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Why did you pick this book for us?
This book is his first book in the genre of children's literature.
So he wrote this before all of his other children's literature books. Okay.
He actually had written adult books and short stories first, and this is his first foray into children's literature.
Okay.
And it worked.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about this book makes you feel like if we're telling people in your yard of books in your house, right, this is one that should be on the shelf?
Well, I think as a school, we love the idea of learning as a process. And this book is a great start to a whole world of literature that you know very well. It's sort of coming of age.
Yeah.
What does it mean for a child to be challenged reasonably or even pushed in some sort of trauma?
Yeah.
And then what did they do to overcome it?
Yeah.
And it's the great coming of age genre. And we have many books at our school that push kids.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, even through this series, we've talked about that process of adversity and the value of that coming of age. So do you want to give a little overview of the book for anyone who may not have read it yet?
So James is a little boy in Britain, and he suffers the trauma. On the first page, his mother and father are killed by a runaway rhinoceros in the zoo. And they were, the line is, they were dead within 35 seconds flat. But James suffered the pain for many years to come. Mm-hmm. That's on the first page of this book. Okay. And so he gets taken to Aunt Spike and Aunt Sponge, and they are horrid women who treat him poorly. And through a magical set of events, a huge peach grows in their yard. Mm-hmm. And the adventure begins. What happens in that with the peach and about the peach and James and the peach.
So, and just to dig into that a little bit, the peach grows because James is approached by a strange person.
Yeah,
right?
He's like it's kind of like the Jack and the Beanstalk thing.
Right.
So for our student listeners, it's the great story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Right. You get the beans, you plant them.
Right. And, so the first moral of the story is when a stranger walks up to you and says, "I have some magic beans."
Don't take the magic beans.
Them.
Well, yeah. Depending, I'm risk averse. You like to take more risks.
I'm just saying what the book says, right? I mean, the adventure happens because he said yes.
He said he was trustworthy.
Oh,
so
well, that's
in today's
credible.
world, he would have sent it as a Snapchat.
Yeah.
And you would just buy it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this peach grows, and ultimately, there's like this tunnel under the peach that grows.
Well, actually, the ants start selling tickets because they're horrid people. They put a fence around it, and then James goes out one night. He sneaks out because they used to lock him in his room, of course, because it's Roald Dahl. And he sees a hole in the peach. And he's thinking, well, what kind of creature would make such a huge hole?
Yeah.
So he crawls up into the middle of it and gets into the middle of the pit, which is like a living room. And there inside the pit, he finds some creatures. Mm-hmm. And these are the little fellows that he hangs out with.
Yeah.
So,
okay, so everything you've said so far, if I'm 9 years old or 7 years old, or as I often do, I'll talk about my 6-year-old, right?
Yeah.
She would hear this so far and be scared.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Is that bad? Does that mean we should put the book down?
No, but I would say that this is one of our first banned books. For a while, this was considered a little violent, and it had alcohol in it, and there were some groups and death. Yeah. And it was actually banned for a little while, and reason prevailed, and it was proven that this doesn't damage children. I think it's perfect for children. To me, it's the same genre of the fables of old, Hansel and Gretel. right? You
Yep.
don't go into the woods by yourself. Don't eat the candy on the house because there's likely a witch that's going to put you in her oven, right? So that those stories that were told in the scary parts of Europe were to really keep kids safe. It was to teach them that harm and evil is out there and be careful.
Yeah.
I love the fact that Dahl specializes in a reasonable amount of fearful trauma.
Yeah. So, in said another way, it's actually healthy for them to experience these things through the lens of somebody else, a fictional character.
Yeah, vicariously.
How do I develop empathy or understanding for someone who's lost their parents on the first page?
That's a great point.
And then of course so he meets this band of characters inside this peach, right?
Well, they appear to be frightening because they're life-size insects. There's a ladybug with 9 spots, a silkworm, a cricket.
Is 9 a lot or a little for a ladybug?
Well, that actually, I'm not going to ruin the story to that.
Okay.
It's actually a story on James and the ladybug later have a discussion about why 9 spots. So I'm not going to tell you the story to that. But,
thank you.
No, it's worth reading. And it's just several insects, and they all have very distinct personalities. The centipede is convinced he has 100 feet. Technically, he has 42. The grasshopper takes issue with it every time he tries to take his shoes off because he makes James take his shoes off. It's like listening to 2 brothers arguing about how many feet do you really have.
Yeah.
And so James ends up living with these people, these life-size insects inside of the pit for a little while.
Yeah. Is it fair to say, or am I reading too much into it, that each of those insects, right? They all have a personality.
They do. They're very distinct.
They all have. They're all almost over-characterized by particular traits.
Exactly.
And as a child reading that, is it a little bit of seeing how a person, James, manages different aspects of a personality, right? Maybe even his own personality.
It is, and first impressions are not actually the way the person may be. Like in the first few pages, one of them starts complaining about how hungry they are, and then they all start complaining.
Yeah.
And then he's frightened because, of course, these are huge bugs. I mean, they're taller than him.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's going to be eaten, and then they find out, they realize, oh my gosh, he thinks we're going to eat him. And they start laughing, and then they go, oh my gosh, that's disgusting. We're insects. We're not animals.
Yeah. I like that first impressions are not always defining, but you looked at me interestingly when you said that. So I'm going to try not to read too much into that or ask you to publicly share your first
I have a lot of
impressions.
thoughts about the first time I met you. Yeah, but that's in my journal. Yeah.
So how does James grow in his experience with these? Like, how is he different at the end of the book from when he first met
I think when I was reading this, I read this in 1979 as a 9-year-old, I would have answered it as he figured out survival. Like, he survived through this grand adventure. And we can touch on it, but we don't want to spoil too much of the story. But I think as an adult looking back on it, it's very specific to me. It's noticeable that Roald Dahl is showing us that through harsh moments, a person really can rise to a new level of challenge, and we would call it in our school critical thinking skills, or even how to manage a group, how to work with a group to solve a hard problem. And so, I as a 9-year-old, I didn't know to say that. I just really was worried that he was going to die. Through the adventure.
But probably as a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, you realize that living through these adventures developed in you a little bit of training of how to handle some of these situations.
Yeah. So I would say from an autobiographical standpoint, my house burned down when I was 9 to the ground.
Oh my goodness!
And
before or after you read the book?
3 months before I read the book, and so we watched it burn to the ground, and we all survived.
This was North Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Traumatic moment for a 9-year-old and my little brother. And 3 months later, Mom and Dad took us to D.C. for 4 or 5 days for a little vacation. And this was one of the books that my mom bought me in the Washington Mall. I remember reading it sitting in the Washington Mall.
Did she do that intentionally, knowing the story already?
Mom's always throwing books my way.
Yeah.
And my 4th grade year was the year that books became something to me. And she and I've talked about it. I think part of it was the actual trauma of the fire. It it alarmed our whole little town.
Were you, if I can spend some time on that,
Yeah.
were you in the house when the fire started?
We were on the back porch, and it was like
Okay.
4 p.m.
Yeah.
And something went wrong with the fireplace, and Dad yelled out,
Everybody out.
Go call the neighbors." And
Okay.
very traumatic sort of 15 minutes.
And
And,
how quickly did you realize that the house was not going to make it? I mean, like I can only imagine.
Yeah.
But the first few minutes, you're
think
like, are they going to get here? Are they going to save?
Well, we have these sort of snapshots in it. My brother and I have talked about it, but
Yeah.
you have these sort of snapshots of running to the neighbors and then running back and then watching Dad unwind a garden hose
Yeah.
and being frightened like this is bad.
Yeah.
And but back to the book. It now in reflection, I think that my mom didn't know anything about James the Giant Peach, but for me, looking back on it, it was a safe place for me to put trauma.
Yeah.
And then look at the hero that he became.
Yeah.
And he made it. And there was this book, and the other book was William Du Bois' The 21 Balloons. I remember the covers of both of them.
Yeah.
Both of those have floating things in them because they end up floating the peach through
Right.
the sky. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, So, anyways.
I remember that part.
But I'm glad you touched on, I wanted to touch on the trauma because Roald Dahl specializes in that. All of the books, there's some kind of bad things that happen to
Yeah.
the kid. Somebody dies.
Yeah.
Because that's what frightens a kid the most.
Yeah.
Mom and
Well,
dad
and
die.
he had so much of it in his own life. Did
Yeah.
you ever read? He wrote. Was it his own autobiography or someone did a biography of him that I read?
Oh, Roald Dahl.
Yeah, it talks
No.
all about his time in
No.
in the war and how all.
Yeah, wasn't
that,
he a correspondent or
Yeah.
something for a little
Yeah,
while?
and-
I've never read anything
and had
about
lots of
it.
trauma.
No.
yeah.
I did not know this.
So that connects as to
Wow.
why he kind of ends up specializing in these books.
I love the fact that he hated school.
Yeah.
Or hated bad schools or hated bad teachers. Certainly hated bad headmasters, which I find beautiful as a headmaster. Like I adore. I adore that thing.
I wouldn't know anything about bad headmasters, Rod. I mean,
that you don't like headmasters. Well, I didn't grow up as a child thinking one day I'm going to be the principal, like on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But
Yeah. Can we talk about how in every movie the principal is such a dolt?
I love it. I think it's teenagers and children need a common enemy, and for the principal to be like that awful headmaster in Harry Potter, that lady that came in with all the rules on the wall,
Yeah.
When I saw that in the movies, I thought, oh, that reminds me of that
Although
Pink Floyd.
you did kind of just disprove my theory because Albus Dumbledore is more of a hero.
There are
type.
exceptions.
There are exceptions.
That's why before I moved here, I had some of my teachers presented to me a Dumbledore wand. But they called me some of the teachers called me Dumbledore because they liked me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Elder Wand, of course, but that's another book.
Yeah, I've not studied the different ones enough to know.
Well, all I know is, there's all these inspirational movies about teachers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Standing up on the desk, oh, Captain, my Captain.
Oh, I love that.
Where's the
love
principal
that.
one?
Yeah, they're not around. I did have someone tell me about the movie The Emperor's Club with Kevin Kline, that I should see that, but I think that's about a teacher too. But I had so many people recommend it that I just thought, no, I'm going to be obtuse and not look at it.
Yeah. So James and the Giant Peach, I remember reading as a kid. I think in school, it was in the curriculum. I'm not sure if it's in. Is this something that's in our curriculum? Do you know? I have no idea.
I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't think to check.
Do you know? Is it still a well-read child's book?
I don't know. I imagine in the last 15 years when Disney produced a Tim Burton version of it, there was probably a spike in sales at that point.
Did you see the movie?
Actually, I watched it when it first came out and didn't like it.
Okay.
And I'm not much of a Tim Burton fan. I can see what he's trying to do, but all the black and the black darkness just kind of bothers me. But actually rewatched it this weekend before I came back on vacation, and I love it. I loved the movie.
What changed in your feeling about it from when you first saw it?
I think what I didn't realize the first time I watched it was his drawings, his puppets, and the darkness really match the best of the illustrators, Quentin Blake, which is the one that I'm holding here. I went back and looked at Quentin Blake's body of work in several of the books that he was the main illustrator for Dahl. And it's obvious to me that Tim Burton was giving an homage to these great illustrators. I mean, their drawings are frighteningly dark, and it even says, here's what James looked like 1 week after the rhinoceros killed his parents. And there's a drawing, and his eyes look different, and Quentin Blake is telling us bad things happen. And it affects us.
So, in your watching of the movie this time, the artistry matched the trauma.
It did. It really did. And also just the fantastical fun of it, because Burton loves colors. And so the ladybug has 9 spots. I think the ladybug, I can't remember. Anyways, I may be getting this mixed up with something else. But
well, it is true. The first time you watch a movie of a book you love, it feels like the evaluation is so much based on is it the same as the book?
You want him to take license because it's a different genre. And now that I reread the book, James, last night, the whole thing, and took about an hour and a half, and there were 2 things that he did different than Dahl did something. There were 2 distinct things that I think that Dahl's is better, but I'm not going to ruin that for anybody.
So we've talked a couple times in a few of the books about the coming of age, dealing with trauma, growing through resilience. So maybe now's a good time to ask, how do we do that as a school, or what's your vision of how we ought to be a part of that process for
I think
our kids?
I think that part of it is the world is happening so fast, and there appears to be so many new pieces of data 24/7, and so both you and I have a computer in our pocket called a phone. It's not even a phone, barely. And I think that when you're training a child and a teenager, and then really us as adults, there is something about the slow baking of thoughts in our hearts, where we have to slow the information down and let a story dig deeper roots into the soul. And I can't do that in watching 2-minute YouTube clips, or a TikTok 6-second thing. But there is, I think, in training the heart, the only way to really do it is to slow the digital pace down, turn technology off more often than we think, and get into an analog world and open up a real book. And it slows the mind down.
It makes you sit in some of the discomfort that the digital world, you just find something else.
Yeah,
right?
Like if I were getting a 2-minute, I can get a 2-minute book summary of James the Giant Peach that's really pretty good. His parents died, the peach rolled down.
Yeah, I know you can, because I did it before we came on the air. So.
I did too. And so you can get a 2-minute version, clip. So you get the plot, you get the basic things.
But you don't get to sit and experience
what happened to the
feel.
seagulls.
Yeah.
But what are the cloudmen, right?
Yeah.
They meet people called the cloudmen, and the sharks. What about the sharks? And so you and I could get that in 2 minutes, and we get the information, but you don't actually get the seed that grows deeper into the heart to actually follow James through the conversation, or listen to him try to sort out the different personalities that are in that pit.
Yeah.
The ladybug is very different than the grasshopper, and so on.
Or wake up in the morning after you read it the night before thinking about, I wonder how he's going to get out of this mess.
Exactly.
I can't see how he's going to get out of it.
And now let me ask you this. When you read novels, can you put it down at night when the character is in trauma? Are you able to leave it?
Yeah.
And then even wait till the weekend and then find out, did they make it out? Like, what type of person?
Yeah, so if it's a high level of trauma, I can't put it down.
Really?
But the thing is, I would say, I read every night before I go to bed. And like 8 times out of 10, I'm actually pretty good at, I get tired. And we've joked about this. Like, sometimes I know it's time to go to sleep because I drop the Kindle on my face.
Yeah, I have Kindle imprints on my head.
Yeah, like my wife makes fun of me because it's like, she'll be like, you did it again. Yeah. I'm like, I know, ow, you know.
Yeah.
But if it's a moment of, I have a bond with this character.
Oh.
Suddenly I'm up for 2 hours.
So your empathy.
Until I get to a place where it's like, okay, I can I can stop.
I
I
think
can stop on this.
You're probably just a more caring individual than I am.
I don't think
you
that's
just
true.
care for people.
Maybe
more,
I just lack the discipline to go to sleep when I need to.
The first time I read Fellowship of the I didn't know this about me until I was in bed reading for the very first time as an adult Fellowship of the Ring, the first one of the trilogy.
Yeah.
And there's this scene where they're in the cave of Mordor, and somehow they make a noise, and then there's these tom-tom drums that start to beat, and their swords turn blue. And the movie picks up this scene well.
Yeah.
Where now orcs are coming. Well, I was reading that for the first time ever as an adult. I was probably like 35. I didn't read any Tolkien until mid-30s.
You didn't read any Tolkien? I did not know that because I know you love Tolkien.
It's a different podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but I maybe I was like 30. But the at that very moment, I thought that's going to be so much fun to find out this weekend when I have more time. And I closed it.
Oh man, yeah, I couldn't have done that.
Put it on the nightstand. I rolled over. I'm like getting into sleep. Like I can go right into sleep fast.
Yeah.
Angie takes a while. She says, "Well, what's happening with the hobbits?" And I went, "I don't know. They made a noise and their swords are turning blue. That means there are orcs nearby."
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, what did they do?" I said, "I just left them there." She could not sleep. She's like you.
Oh, she never asked you about a book you were reading again, huh?
No.
Yeah.
No. So even last night, there's a battle going on in the book I was reading, and it's between two clipper ships, and I can't wait till this weekend.
Yeah.
To find out who
I need
wins
to
that
learn that
ship
skill.
battle.
I need to learn that
I don't
skill.
know if it's a skill or if I'm just callous. That's what
I don't think that's it. I do think because in our many millions of listeners, someone's going to point out that they didn't make it to Mordor in the first book, and it was probably the caves of Moria or something
I don't
like
remember.
that.
Yeah.
So just acknowledging, okay, we might be off a little bit.
We're off a little bit. It's
on
been a
our,
while. Yeah, I taught a class on Tolkien and Lewis, for a year with a bunch of teenagers. It was fun. So I knew all that stuff then.
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff goes the other way. But back to the training of children is, I think the point we want to reiterate is the slowness of a book allows them to vicariously really dig into and really take the time to think through empathy, pain, recovery, courage, cowardice, failure, redemption, and the speed at which a video gives it makes the learner so passive when you're watching a movie. You're really just trying to grapple to the next visual.
Right.
And so I love movies. I love the video world, but I learn less from them because it comes at me so fast.
Yeah.
And so I think for children, getting them to just slow down and then even have something to talk about with their parents. Like, well, what happened when James came up with the idea about the seagulls? What happened? And then that creates a slower talking point.
Yeah.
That mom and dad
which
kind
is
of
more reflective of how we experience things in real life, right?
Yes.
Like there are things that it just takes days, months, years, but to process through, to work through.
That's true, and I think it addresses the way that our hearts work, right? You and I've talked about Deuteronomy 6, the great passage of the Shema. It's called the Great Shema. The verbs are teach these things to your children. I think the verbs are when you walk and when you lie down and when you sit. Everywhere you go, teach them these things. The Lord our God is one, and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And there is a contemplative, slow process. I mean, if we just use that verse as how to parent children, the world would be a better place. Walking, teaching, sitting, teaching, as you go, not too many videos. Yeah. This has been fun to talk about this. You and I've talked a little bit about the balance of the digital world, right?
Yeah.
You and I both.
Yeah.
Like I have 4 computers within 10 feet of me that I use all day.
Yep.
And you have several, and you and I both struggle with how to turn off the digital and rest back into.
Yes, although you seem to be solving that much more than I am currently.
I would say that if you saw me balancing my digital world and analog world, it would look like a very clumsy 4-year-old trying to ride a bicycle. So I'd be like, or like Bambi on ice sledding around.
Yeah, but at least you got the training wheels.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Yeah.
To
it's inspiring.
Yeah, but it just takes some time. Yeah.
So just as we wrap up on James and the Giant Peach,
Yeah.
Because I know for a lot of our listeners this is going to bring back memories because it was a really well-read book.
Yeah.
But Roald Dahl has a whole library of books like this. So if I'm someone who's like, gosh, I remember loving that book, what else of his could I read?
Yeah, well,
what would you recommend?
Most everybody knows Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? Mm-hmm. And now when the movie was made, Gene Wilder, the star, insisted that the movie be called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
So of course, he got that. And then the sequel to that, the book sequel, was Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. I didn't like that as much as a kid. I didn't get it. Matilda and Fantastic Mr. Fox, which Wes Anderson turned into a movie about 12 years ago. And my personal favorite out of all these, and my number one all-time favorite childhood book, is Danny, Champion of the World. It's one of his lesser known. And but all of these are in some way a coming of age of a child that went through trauma, and it's Danny in particular stands out to me because it starts with his mother is dead, and it's just he and his dad living behind a auto mechanic shop, and so the father-son relationship is so natural and beautiful. And rarely do you get to see a good parent in a doll one, but the dad and Danny are really mutual heroes of the story.
Yeah.
And I think I've probably read that 15 times.
Yeah.
And but all of Dahl's stuff is that sort of coming of age, childhood, pre-puberty.
Yeah.
Like Matilda. Have you seen the movie
Yeah.
Matilda?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Danny DeVito's a scream as the really mean dad. And
yeah. So just picking up on something you just said that I hadn't thought through, but you're right. Other than the one you just spoke of, the parents are not great parents in
they're
Roald
not
Dahl
great parents,
books.
or they're passive.
I feel like we need to play therapist with Roald Dahl at some point and be what
probably,
happened?
He probably needed some therapy.
Yeah.
He probably, we would probably label him today, but back in those days, they just smoked cigarettes.
Yeah.
Instead of going to the therapist.
Right.
Which probably would get
and
banned.
Apparently wrote children's novels.
And our editors may edit that sentence out.
They
but
probably
it's just
will.
True.
But
even in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, everybody has seen that movie. It seems like everybody has seen that. I got the golden ticket and all that. But his mom and dad they're lovely, but they're very passive and lean toward the risk averse. So Grandpa has to get up out of the bed.
Yeah.
So Grandpa becomes the hero, which just makes it so much fun.
Yeah.
But even then, the mom and dad are not active participants. Charlie seems to be the most mature in that little house.
Yeah,
and
that's true of James as well.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even to the very end.
Yeah.
I mean, how it ends is so much fun. And you see him go back to James. You see James from going from a beat-down child in an abusive trauma and then abuse to the hero.
Yeah.
And he looks like a hero. In the last 20 pages, you just want to cheer him on. You're like, wow, I want to be like James when I grow up.
Yeah.
I told Angel this morning, I want to be like James as a head of school every day. Like he made it through a very hard thing and was smiling at the end, and he was helping other people.
Well, I guess if you're going to be James, I got to figure out which of the 7 creatures I need to try to.
I think I would. If you were the centipede, I would take your shoes off for you.
Okay, all 42 of them or whatever.
Well,
it is.
yeah, but the cricket, the other, it's only 42. You're
Okay.
convinced there's 100.
Yeah,
the grasshopper will.
I only
confront
own
you
like
on
3
that.
pairs of shoes as it is. So.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's a different problem. So.
Well,
Anyways.
this has been a lot of fun.
I've loved this.
Yeah,
thank you
and thanks for sharing a little bit about your own story as well. And to those of you at home, thanks for listening and I guess watching for the first time.
Yeah. It was,
sorry you had to see our faces.
oh my gosh.
But but we'll be back both with our Eagle Perspective podcast and continuing on our series of The Art of Books. Just a reminder, if this is your first time joining us, you can always download our other podcasts on Spotify, Apple Music, or other places where podcasts are available. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.